from continuing, I'm going to move a little bit closer. And I'm just going to call, to keep you awake, I've teleported some of my colleagues in from Bolivia. This is Doña Victoria, and I'd also like to call Carlos and Juan Cayo, please, to join us today. It's amazing how quickly they were able to get here, and hopefully that will be an inspiration to all of you to put your phones down and stop nodding your heads. Well, before I continue, I think we'll come back to this slide. That's probably a lot more interesting than what I'm going to be speaking about to most of you, since I now sense how obsessed you all are with climbing and mountaintops. So I'd like to go ahead and change to the next slide. Leon, I think I can't do that, right? Yeah. Because this is through Google Presentations.
Nope, not anymore.
Oh, it's not?
Hit the next button.
Okay. Well, to begin with, and thank you, Ellen, I'd like to say good afternoon to everybody. And I hope that after 2 already full and interesting days of presentations and our first panel discussion, I can ask for your attention for just a little bit longer. And I would like to begin by saying that it is truly an honor for me to be here. I often feel so far away and so forgotten in the region where I work that it's really nice to be able to come into the company of other professionals who are mountain lovers and doing what they can to protect the mountains in the regions where they work and elsewhere, as many people are working on multiple continents, as I am as well. And it's especially important for me to be able to become a part of this community because we see so graphically in the region where I work all the pressure that the mountains are under today. And I refer not only to the on-the-ground pressures of day-to-day life in the mountains by so many people, but also, as we are now hearing in this conference, and I'm very happy to be hearing this come up so often, the specter of global warming, which is transforming our mountains and today the human and non-human communities that depend so greatly upon them. And also, before I forget, I want to thank Ellen and Roger and Remy for all of the help that they have given to me and to everybody to organize this conference and to make it possible for me to come from so far away. And finally, and as a preface to my presentation, I would like to explain that since I submitted my topic and summary to Ellen a few months ago, I've been talking with a lot of people in the communities that we work in, our partners, and it really caused me to make some changes and to move away from focusing on, only what we are doing, because we're one tiny actor in a big field of so many actors trying to do something about changes that are taking place in the Andes. And so as I began to pull my presentation together today, I realized it would be a mistake for me to talk about our work alone. And though I'm going to share some concrete examples of the things that we've been doing, on behalf of the communities and the different actors that we work with, I want to take advantage of what is truly a unique opportunity for us. We don't do this ever. And this, what I consider a frontline audience, to describe more generally some of the conditions facing people who try to recreate in the mountains, and also the communities where they might end up. And of course, I'm going to highlight some of the barriers that we find being faced in our work and in the work of other actors, and also some opportunities for shifting these conditions in the direction of, if not global sustainability, perhaps local sustainability. And in addition, and as many of you undoubtedly know, the impact of waste, which has been a popular topic yesterday and today, is just one of many increasingly harmful human-produced impacts on all ecosystems everywhere. And you can't really understand it without looking at the wider picture of why those problems exist and are growing. And I hope that that through being able to talk with some of you in these days and perhaps beginning to work in the future with some of you, it may be possible to conceptualize and even implement some partnerships with some of you so that we can get some support for what we're doing. Because I really do think that there are some interesting opportunities to get involved in Bolivia. And in some ways, it's the perfect time because the country's undergoing a lot of changes that some of its neighbors have already experienced. So I'm going to begin with, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Central Andes, which is the region that we work in. And when I say we, again, I'm not just referring to my company, Sendas Altas, and our principal brand, which is La Paz on Foot, but I'm talking about the guides, the rural communities, the traditional authorities that are in these communities, municipal governments, and people who come to learn about and enjoy these landscapes. And although the conditions I'm going to describe aren't really all unique to where I'm working, enough of them are that I think it's important to describe in a more general way what things are like where we're working. So let me go back now to this great picture. And unfortunately, the mountains are not quite as white as they used to be. But this is basically the principal area that we work in Bolivia, although we do work throughout the country. This region is known as the Cordillera Real, which translates to the Royal Range. It sounds nicer in Spanish. And it's about a 350-kilometer long stretch of the Andes. There are about 10 peaks over 6,000 meters for those of you that are peak junkies. And this is an area where you have four principal cultural groups. You have mestizos. These are people who are of mixed descent. You have more than 1 million Aymara, which is a culture group with a distinct language, very unique cultural practices, and land use management systems. You have small populations on the other side of the mountains of what we call Afro-Bolivianos. These are people of African descent who were originally brought to work in mines, but could not because of the conditions. Their physiology did not permit it. And they live a little bit further down on the other side. And then, of course, a very small group called Callawaya. And these were people who are believed to, are known as the medicine people of the Andes. And you can see here, this is there are two cities, La Paz and El Alto, and their population is more than 2 million. And let's see here, I've got some notes here. The altitude of El Alto is 4,000 meters, about 1.5 million people. And then La Paz, which is in a deep valley that comes off of this highland plain here, is a little more than 1 million, living at a range between 4,000 and 3,300 meters. So we have about 2 million people living and depending in so many ways upon the Cordillera Real for water, energy. There's many farms here. And you can also see Lake Titicaca, which receives the drainage from the Cordillera. These are some of the most well-known and attractive peaks. We have Illimani, which is a sacred mountain of the city of La Paz. And when I say sacred, it is not simply in some kind of distant past when it was revered by native peoples. This mountain is very sacred today for most of the residents of these cities. It's present in music, in artwork, in clothing, in restaurant names, and so forth. It's a very powerful presence for the city. This is Illampu, which is at the northern end of the Cordillera. And then this is Tunicondoriri, which is one of the most popular climbs for day climbs and also as a starting point for longer treks and climbs into the Cordillera Real, which of course can last for many days. This is another way to look at it. You can see some of the peaks again along the Cordillera Real. You can see Lake Titicaca, and you can also see what lies on the other side, which is the Amazon basin. Okay, so you cross over the Andes and you're immediately into another drainage system. The Lake Titicaca basin is a closed watershed that ultimately drains into the Salar de Uyuni, which some of you may have heard of, the Great Salt Flats at the southern end of the Bolivian Altiplano. And I've circled again some of the most popular peaks that are a destination for adventure sports of many kinds. Let's see. Here, just to show off a little bit, this is Volcán Tunupa. This is on the edge of the Salar de Uyuni at the south of the Altiplano. And this, it might not have a lot of pretty snow up there at the top, but it is well above 6,000 meters, and it has become an increasingly popular destination for people who are interested in trekking and climbing. And it has just spectacular views to the south along the Salar de Uyuni. And there are more than a dozen volcanoes in this region. Some of them are active, some of them are inactive. And NASA even does some research here because apparently some of the landscapes are similar to lunar landscapes. Just to show off again, here I have a transect of the area where we work. You can see where Denver would be located if Denver was there. And then you can see where La Paz is located, much, much higher, and again with more than 2 million people. And then you can see the peaks, the highest areas in the range. Now, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to read this book, 1491. If you haven't, I highly recommend it if you're interested in ecological history and history. But this book was very important for the business concept or business design that we used to structure our company. He talks about how in the past humans have organized themselves in this extreme region. I'm not sure if there's anywhere else in the world where you could find 2 million people living at this altitude. And it's not the first time. Maybe there weren't 2 million people in Cusco, maybe there weren't 2 million people in Tiwanaku, but there were hundreds of thousands of people. And how did they do it? How did they figure out how to live at this altitude with many of the technologies, or almost none of the technologies that we have today that do make it a little bit more comfortable? And what he describes is that these places like Cusco and like Tiwanaku were centers of command and control, okay? And so while there were some resources available to them at this high altitude, they had to have political, economic, spiritual control over additional communities located in the different ecological tiers that cascade off the Andes in both sides. So they could get dried fish from the Pacific and shells for their jewelry. They could get wood from the Amazon and medicinal plants. And so we took that concept and designed our company in such a way that we sought out communities in each of these different ecological tiers where we could develop long-term relationships and begin to work on some of the mountain development issues that we've heard about, such as improving incomes, stemming the migration of youth from rural areas into the city, which is, of course, a terrible problem in much of the developing world. The big circle basically shows the region in this particular part of Bolivia that we're active. And as I said, we work in other parts of the country, but this is, for today, we're focusing on this particular region. Here you can see the ruins of Tiwanaku. Has anybody heard of Tiwanaku before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a few people, great. Well, this was believed to be one of these centers of command and control over a massive area that you can see here in this map. And again, if you're interested in seeing how these civilizations rose and fell, I recommend this book, 1491. Charles C. Mann is the author. Here is a really spectacular photograph of La Paz en el Alto. Unfortunately, you cannot see the Cordillera Real, but if I could just move the photo down a tiny bit, you would then see just how close these cities are to the Cordillera Real and how dependent they are on them and how many impacts they are having on the mountains for water, for energy, and for certain other resources that are a part of the culture and the diet, for example. This is El Alto, which all of what you see here has developed in the last 50 years. In 1954, Bolivia experienced what's called as the Agrarian Revolution, and that initiated a process of migration of rural people from the countryside into the city. And here we can see the outcome of that. A massive city that is now practically reaching Lake Titicaca and is beginning to climb up towards the Cordillera. And we refer to it, and for our business model, as the new center of command and control over a region. And it's true. La Paz, for its economic power, because part of the national government is located here, because there's so much migration from rural areas to this urban center, controls a very broad area. Goods are brought in and taken out. People come here for education, for health care, for a lot of their needs. And so, again, as Tiwanaku and Cusco did in the past, La Paz now is this new center. And I moved to Bolivia in 2003 because my wife is from La Paz. We met in Gainesville at the University of Florida, which in this fantastic program for anybody who's thinking about going back to school, interdisciplinary ecology. It was wonderful. But just as we moved back to Bolivia, the country started to go through a major shift where the traditional national level government was basically kicked out. And it ushered in a process that several years later resulted in this man being elected president. Most of you have probably heard of Evo Morales. He does a really good job of getting into the press. And while it's debatable how many of the changes he's made are actually for the better, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many Bolivians, he has permitted the emergence of a new sense of dignity and pride amongst the indigenous or native, or in the case of this region, the originarios. People in the highlands where we live call themselves the originarios, the original peoples, as a way to distinguish themselves from people like me or other people of mixed descent, and to assert themselves as the rightful, if not owners, protagonists in this region. You can see here a poster, 200 free years. Well, this was to celebrate the belief that the first cries for freedom against the Spanish colonial powers took place in Sucre, in the southern part of Bolivia. Well, and this was by people of Spanish descent who were trying to break free from colonial rule. Well, you would think that the image in that poster would be of a conquistador riding a horse, which is how you usually find Simón Bolívar and other important colonial figures depicted. But instead of that, you have someone who is clearly dressed in native clothing. And this is, again, trying to say that this process of liberation is something that we are the protagonists in, and so we want the credit for it. And then, of course, you see the president dressed in a traditional hat that would be worn by a traditional leader in a small, medium, or large originario community, and holding a stick that is adorned with traditional fabrics. And so I've been fortunate, and sometimes scared, and sometimes frustrated by these 10 years when I have started to work on issues related to resource management, waste management, and community development. And the tool that I and my partners have chosen to use, and as Ellen described, is a type of tourism that seeks to promote low-impact, sustainable values and practices, and tries to level the playing field and create horizontal relationships between ourselves and our partners, and between our clients and the communities and other actors that they come into contact with. So, these are just a few actors that we work with on a daily basis. You can see women working as animal handlers for treks and climbs. You can see spiritual leaders who often bless our expeditions before they begin. You can see one of our staff members who organizes and carries out trainings in many of the communities that we work with on many issues. You can see somebody proud with his little 2 grams of gold that he found in one of the rivers in the area where we work. And unfortunately, this is something causing very negative impacts in the region. And you can see a park guard in one of our clients on one of our treks. And of course, there are so many other people that we interact with on a daily basis. These are just a few. This shows, this is not part of the Cordillera Real, but I couldn't resist putting it in the presentation. This is the highest peak in the country, Sajama, 6,542 meters. It is one of the most popular climbing destinations, which is not to say much. We're talking several hundred people attempting every year. And here you can kind of see how our business is set up. You know, we use La Paz as our center of command and control, and then we ask our clients, well, where do you want to go? And these are the different ecological tiers or eco-regions where we have built these close relationships with communities that allows us to work on some of these issues in a trusting, horizontal way. Okay. And so to get even more specific, and it's a shame that these, I think, is this a PowerPoint now? It disconfigured a few things. But even before Evo Morales came to power, some of the main conservation organizations working in Bolivia in the Andes is known as a hot spot for biodiversity because you have the confluence of the Amazonian lowlands with the Andean highlands, and where they meet, this zone of transition, you have extremely rich biological communities. And so many of the world's big conservation organizations, such as Conservation International, the Wildlife Conservation Society, the Nature Conservancy, and others, have been present working with Bolivia, Peru, and other countries along that fold to set up protected areas. And one of the tools that they developed is a concept known as community-based tourism, which hopefully is self-explanatory, but the idea is that you can work with communities to help them set up their own initiatives, their own companies, where they are actually owners of the companies, and then a partner like ours, La Paz on Foot, would enter into a horizontal relationship with them, and they would provide certain services, such as guides, lodging, food, walks, interpretation, transportation, any number of services. And they would be paid fair prices, and they would be empowered by this and start to feel that they are actually owners of the enterprise as opposed to a subservient actor, which is basically there just to keep our clients happy. And so this idea of community-based tourism has been successful in some cases and not successful in others. We have two here, one which is just at the base of Sajama, which has been fairly successful, and it serves as an arrival point for people who are getting ready to do ascents. and it has hot showers, which is something that is very difficult to get anywhere else. And then here we have another example of a community on Lake Titicaca, which we have worked extremely closely with. And it is a site that is about 2 hours away from the Cordillera Real, and that we are trying to help them develop as a place for acclimatization. The altitude is 3,800 meters. And so you have many people coming, and they'll ask us, I need a couple of days to get used to the altitude before I do anything serious. What do you recommend? And so they can come here. These are homestays. You live with families. And then that rock outcropping that you see in the back has trails and some rocks that you can, get warmed up on, if you will. And so the Morales government, when they came into power, knew something about this and has taken it on as basically the national approach to promoting tourism. And so you've had the development of 20, 30 of these initiatives all around the country in many ecosystems, many ecoregions. And as a company, we have taken on the policy of trying, if we're working in a certain region, we look for these kinds of initiatives because we believe that it's the best way to operate safely in these regions because there are security issues, access issues, services issues that in a country like Bolivia are something that you have to be very careful about because either the services simply don't exist, there are high risks for clients, and so if we can be working with some established entity, it gives us a little more security and it gives us somebody to be in contact with. So what we have done is now we have communities in each of these ecoregions, and now we have many years, in some cases, of regular work with them. And we've been able to develop these, I think, generally horizontal relationships that can be very frustrating, very complicated, very slow. But in the context that I just described to you, we feel that it is the best way for us to work in where we are. Here's just a few pictures. This is not community-based tourism. This is a privately owned hotel on the Salar de Uyuni. And these are the conditions that these community-based tourism enterprises, unless they've received a phenomenal amount of financial support from an external source, are not able to offer. What they do offer are experiences like this, sharing a traditional meal with people from the community, and really being up close with people. And we have guides that facilitate the communication if Spanish or Aymara are not spoken by the clients. So you can see just in these few pictures the real difference between the two approaches. And this is not to say that private hotels like these don't have their place. We use many of them where we don't have options, but we do feel that there is a lot more positive impacts from working with these kinds of small community-based enterprises. So basically we have mutually beneficial relationships with these communities, or we try to. They get benefits of increased incomes. We see that they feel more proud about their heritage in a place where youth are leaving, basically, and you have a rapid depopulation of rural areas. We see, hopefully, some opportunities for their children who can participate in trainings. Sometimes our clients give donations to schools. Sometimes we are able to generate, we have a community, corporate social responsibility funds that we dedicate to working with communities for some of their needs that aren't necessarily related to our clients. And we do a lot of work on waste management in these communities. On the one hand, because our clients don't like to get to a dirty place, but also because the people in these communities know that waste is a problem, and they just don't know what to do about it, and they don't know how to do something about it. And this is just an example of a workshop that we do for planning a trail system in one of the communities that, with that rock outcropping that I showed you on Lake Titicaca. So we work with them to figure out what they think the best routes are. But unfortunately, these communities are often at a major disadvantage, and we're not the only people that are present in these communities. Just as an example, this is the nicest bathroom that you might find in some of these communities, and this would be the bathroom that a wealthier family has been able to build for themselves. They're basically a closed septic pit toilet. This here in the middle is a terrible example. Again, this community that we work with on Titicaca, of an Adventist summer camp. And they just showed up, paid off the authorities from the community, and decided to have their annual meeting here. And these are their latrines. And this is Lake Titicaca, about 20 meters in the background. They brought 5,000 people to the community. And when they left, they simply dug it all up, took it all away, and covered over the pits with dirt. And left about 50 bags of garbage as well. So what we're trying to do is empower communities like this so that if that happens again, they have the capacity to say, no, you cannot do this, or they can say, yes, you can do it, but only under the following circumstances. Because the municipal government, the federal government, has absolutely no management norms or policies that they would be able to call on and say, well, this is not permitted here because Lake Titicaca is a Ramsar site and you simply cannot do these kinds of things in a Ramsar site, or this is simply our community, we don't want this here. They're at a major disadvantage culturally towards somebody who might come from the city with a few extra dollars and be able to talk the leaders into letting this happen. Okay, now just going back a minute to La Paz now, unfortunately, and watching and listening to yesterday and today's presentations has been both inspiring and very depressing for me. Waste management is really not being addressed in any kind of systematic or sustainable way where we're working anywhere in the regions. There may be isolated examples of a dry toilet that's been set up somewhere, but those are unique and usually come through organizations such as our own. They're isolated incidents. Getting ready for this talk and this conference, speaking with some of our climbing guides and other partners in the areas where they're working, it's the same. There are no waste management plans of any kind in the Cordillera Real. There may be a few mountain huts with pit toilets, but that would be it. And it gets worse. The picture of the city of La Paz here, again, about 1.5 million people. La Paz has absolutely no waste management, water management of any kind. So what we say to our clients when they show up is, every time you flush, it goes straight into the Amazon basin. And that's the truth. It may disintegrate before it gets there, but that's where it's headed. You're allowed to gasp if you want. So anyway, to now get to some of the, to kind of summarize some of these barriers, which I think I've already touched on plenty of them. The first thing I would like to mention is that the opportunity costs in a lot of these communities where we're working to get involved with any kinds of changes are very high. And I would just like to invite Doña Victoria to maybe explain to us a little bit about why it's been hard for her to get involved with some of these initiatives. Victoria?
My name is Victoria Laruta, and I live in the small village of Hanamipata in the Cordillera Real. I want to help with the bathrooms, but I cannot, as my husband has taken a job in the mines for better pay. My older children are now gone for better opportunities, and I'm now left to care for my aging father and the smaller children, 20 sheep, 2 pigs, and a cow. This year, I've also taken the responsibility of being secretary for our community council. So you see, I don't have very much time and a lot of demands.
Yes, thank you very much, Victoria. Well, we hear this all the time, as you can imagine. And as good as our intentions are, we often meet up with these kinds of situations where the idea that even if communities are asking, as Alex is your name, described, they want this kind of opportunity, they have very busy lives. When I started working in this, it was just amazing. And you think, well, you know, poor people, of course, they're just going to all get on board. But they have very busy lives. They have school children, they have community meetings, they have fields that they're farming, they have to go to market, they have to go do their paperwork in the city. And so it can be very challenging for them to get involved. And that is one thing that makes the process so slow. And again, and this is one of the things that was kind of depressing for me over the last couple days, is there's such limited access to information and technology for preventing some of these impacts, even for us. You know, all these things that so many of you have going on. I feel like a kid in a candy shop. You know, wow, I want to do that. We should do that. That would be great. But where we are and the context that we work in, we simply have a very hard time. And because we're a private company and we're not an NGO, we often have difficulty accessing the resources and the people who could bring some of those technologies to where we're working. And we simply don't have people on our staff who could dedicate themselves to the time it requires to make those things happen. We know that they're out there. We know what some of you are doing, but getting you there, getting the worms that are going to eat the waste in these community toilets that we'd like to build becomes very complicated. These opportunity costs, such as Victoria's, make it complicated further still. You also have this tendency in the international development world to develop and implement projects that last 1, 2, 3 years and then they're gone. You know, so you may have well-intentioned, the GTZ, the Germans, or whatever other entity says, yeah, well, we're going to go in and we're going to solve that problem. And they send down their technicians, they send down their teams, they send down a lot of money, they buy Jeeps, they do what they can, and in 3 years or less, they're gone. And the capacity, building local capacity to continue these projects takes more than 3 years. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we still have to constantly make sure that these things move forward and are used and sustained and appreciated and fixed up and maintained, and there's toilet paper every time there needs to be, and these are people that don't necessarily use toilet paper themselves, and so even that becomes an issue. And again, referring specifically to outdoor sports, adventure sports, trekking and climbing are incipient activities in Bolivia, where these pictures I've been seeing here of the streams of people climbing Mount Fuji, or the image today of that line of people climbing Mount Everest. Well, I had a client who had just done some trekking in Peru and then came and did some trekking with us in the Andes, and she said, well, I would compare Bolivia and Peru in the following way. Peru, every day is an 80 hola day. Everybody get that? So you're walking all day. Hola, 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 because you see so many people. But you get to Bolivia and you might find 1 or 2 people. Hola, and that's it all day. Well, that's really great for a lot of people, especially for our friends in Mont Blanc. I think that would be a welcome change, and elsewhere. But because it's so low still, because it's such an incipient part of the landscape, it's very difficult for people to commit. And I wanted to ask now Carlos to tell us, he's one of our guides, and he can just fill us in on some of the difficulties we have, for example, with training and keeping good guides. Carlos, adelante.
Thank you. I'm Carlos, your guide. Stephen, appreciate it, clearly from southern Bolivia. The barriers that we have, first and foremost, are all the kids are leaving the rural environments and villages, and they're getting into the urban areas, so we're lacking really a resource for guides. And when we do find these kids that are interested, it's the expense of being able to train them. It might be $3,000 to get certified as a guide, and be able to work, which is months of our salaries. And then finally, if we find the kids, if they're able they still have to deal with insecurities in the high mountain environment in Bolivia, and that comes through problems with the mining culture, like Victoria's husband creates there, and some of the villages, there's some infighting and competition there. So we have multiple barriers, a lot of it on the human resources there, and then the culture, the high end with the mining as well. So, tough time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. And it's certain what Carlos says, you know, is such a draw for youth to leave rural areas and move to the city for education, health, technology, all the candy that's there that is simply not available in rural areas in Bolivia. And I guess that's enough of those. I could go on, but I won't. And now, I'd like to just talk about some of the opportunities that we're seeing and maybe cheer things up a little bit. There are some existing organizations that are weak. There are guiding associations. There is an interesting young woman climbing guide who has started an initiative called Mujer Montaña to try to get women involved in guiding and climbing and other adventure sports. There is a large group of Bolivian technicians who know how to work in these communities. A lot of times, people like myself will stick our foot in our mouth because we simply don't understand the local language well enough. And with all of this international support from USAID or GTZ or all these agencies that come and go, unfortunately, what we do have as one positive result of that is that there is local capacity to work on these issues. But unfortunately, these jobs come and go. There's no sustainability in this kind of work. So one day somebody might be working on a project to install dry bathrooms in a community, and then the project finishes and they're no longer around and they end up working in their mother's shop or driving a taxi. And so that capacity, which is there, could be drawn upon for moving some of these issues forward. We also have in Bolivia something brand new. In the last 5 years, for better or for worse, the Bolivian economy is undergoing a boom, in part because of increased mining and several other sectors of the economy. And we are now having the emergence of a middle class in the larger cities. And just last year, the first outdoor sports store opened up in the city of La Paz. Now, this is unheard of because generally, people from the city don't really go out to the country. Also, as Alex described, this cultural divide between people from the city and the country is enormous. There's a lot of fear, and there are historical reasons for it, of why urban mestizo or even white people are afraid of the indigenous or originario people. I'm not saying everybody feels that way, but it's strong enough that you generally don't find people with any kind of purchasing power going out and trekking in these fantastic mountains. Now, that was the first thing when I moved to Bolivia. I was like, why isn't everybody running around these mountains? This is incredible. Because of this divide, they're afraid. Because they're afraid of violence, they're afraid of being robbed, they're afraid that there's no bathroom, they're afraid that there's no food, they're afraid if they park their car, it's going to be stolen. But now with this growing middle class and this outdoor sports store popping up, my hope is that there may be a way to start activating that class of Bolivians to get them out into the landscape and start adding value to it for outdoor sports, and perhaps creating jobs and other opportunities in some of these rural communities. And we have had some experiences with this, but it's very difficult because of the fear factor. We also have, and this is, if you recall in one of my pictures, there was a man dressed in one of these colorful Andean cloths blowing on some smoke. This was a shaman, or a yatiri as they're called. People from Bolivia are highly animistic. these mountains, and this is pervasive, it does not only apply to the rural originarios. Everybody, whether they're middle class, mestizo, or white people, revere the mountains. And this is something else that has not been taken advantage of, so that there are more efforts to protect and conserve and clean up these mountains. And this is an opportunity where I think some interesting work could be done to try and capitalize on that spiritual connection to the mountains, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, they are under a lot of pressure from mining, from garbage, from burning, and so forth, from climate change. It just goes on. And finally, Bolivia, and this is something that I think has also come out of this shift, this political shift. For so long, Bolivia was just a country where the government basically existed to move resources out, whether it was silver from Potosi, or wood from the Amazon, or other minerals that are so present in the Andes. That the government really, I think, in most ways, just was there to keep people down so that all that could get out. And this new administration, although it continues to exploit these resources, and not always in the most sustainable way, has fomented this idea that we need to protect what's ours because it's been taken away for us for so long. And I think it wouldn't be difficult to apply that to the mountains. When it comes to climate change, people are very aware that Bolivians are very aware that until very recently, their contribution to global warming was almost nothing. And you will hear speeches and people talking on the radio and articles, why should we pay for what the North has done to us? And this is all part of this idea of protecting what's ours. And for these mountain protection issues, I feel that this is another opportunity for capitalizing on that. And I would just now have one more guest who teleported in this afternoon. Juan is just going to talk about some of his thoughts about some opportunities.
Hello, I'm Juan Mamani. I'm just your regular Juan Shaman, and I'm just from a rural mountain community, one of hundreds in Bolivia. And I'd like to start up a community-based tourist enterprise with Sindus Alta. We've got trekking and rivers, plenty of wildlife. We love to dance. We're not sure where you can come visit. Great food, great music, and we need some financial support. So can you help us out?
Well, we get this all the time. Because we work in these rural communities, and in some places these projects are going well, slowly but well, other neighboring communities find out about it, and they knock on their door, and they say, we want the same thing. We want to do this too. Look what we've got. We've got this ruin. We've got this waterfall. We've got this ascent that, we would be willing to take people up on. Unfortunately, as a small company, we simply don't have the capacity to do that. And when we can, we look for funds from foundations outside of Bolivia generally, and we've had some success in that. But again, this is an opportunity just waiting to be taken advantage of, because there is sincere interest, because they've seen, and amongst the Aymara in particular, there is a lot of competition and jealousy among these communities where they see, oh, well, so-and-so's got his dry bathroom, I want mine. And this kind of rivalry is something that we also would like to develop in a positive way, obviously. And we know the demand is out there. Okay, so I'm just about done. A few concrete things that we do in addition to the ones that I mentioned with our clients on our website. We have a section, what to do with waste. Every time they come in, we give them a briefing, and we use the Leave No Trace principles as a way of informing them about what we expect them to do when they're with us on their treks or other activities. Unfortunately, we're not very good at enforcing these things, but we do what we can to let people know that it's something that they need to be thinking about. And also, I think Alex talked about the importance of certificates. We give trainings, and we try to make it as formal as possible, especially for people whose level of formal education is often next to nothing. And these little acts like a certificate after training make a very big difference to kind of really reinforce and solidify these new skills that they've learned. And it's not coming up, unfortunately, but we also offer to our clients the opportunity to work with a Swiss NGO called My Climate. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but you can go to the My Climate website and calculate your carbon emissions for your air travel from your home country to Bolivia. And then, according to that, they calculate a donation. And they have projects in Bolivia. And so if you want to do that calculation to offset your emissions, and this NGO will work on projects like solar ovens or others so that you can offset your emissions in that way. So we do what we can for that kind of waste. Again, these are a couple of examples. This is Denise. She's the Bolivian climber who has started this really interesting initiative, Mujer Montaña, to try to get Bolivian women engaged in adventure sports. For them, it has often sort of been off limits in a very machista culture. And this is going really well for her. And then the Guiding Association every year at the beginning of the climbing season will organize a party for the guides, so to kind of mark the beginning. The Alliance Française every year for the International Day of Mountains will sponsor films and photographic exhibits in the city of La Paz. So there are little things going on, but I guess the part of that there's not really any coordination. You know, there's just these different isolated things happening. They're happening, and that's great, but they could be so much more effective with more coordination and communication. This is the Facebook page of the Association of Mountain and Trekking Guides in Bolivia, some of whom are certified, others who are not. Unfortunately, you can see in the red circles, they're not that active. Their most recent post in their Facebook page was 3 months ago. We have a course of international rescue, which was in October 2010, 4 years ago. And so the fact that these organizations exist and they are active once a year, twice a year, the message here is that they need to be strengthened. And that takes money, it takes time, it takes people to come in and strengthen these bodies so that they can do the work that they need to do. So of the many, many lessons we're learning, I'll just summarize 3 here. We feel that long-term, really long-term operator-community partnerships that are transparent, fair, and include a mix of training and support combined with gradually increasing income generation is the way to go. Nobody works for free. We've seen that if people are getting some income from tourism or from building the eco bathroom, they are much more likely to stay committed. It sounds kind of simplistic, but I think most of us operate in that way, even though we might have the capacity to volunteer with some of our time. Secondly, any benefits from this cooperation has to be very tangible. It's very difficult for people who are living on a day-to-day economy to wait 2 years for the first tourist to show up. Okay, it simply won't happen. And one of the things we've always tried to do is get that happening as soon as we can. So they're saying, wow, you know, I can buy school books for my children this year. And that really engages them in a strong way. And finally, opportunity costs occur for all actors, for us, for everybody, and cannot be underestimated, and they have to be taken into account when planning joint projects. This is so important because, as Doña Victoria made very clear, she's got so much going on in her life that it's really hard for her to come and devote 2 full days on a weekend to building the eco bathroom that we can only come in from the city for those 2 days to do. She can give 2 hours today, 2 hours next week, and we have to accommodate that. Opportunities for collaboration. Obviously, there are so many ways. This is just a little picture of some volunteers that came to help us design the trail system for this rock outcropping where we're trying to promote the site as a acclimatization destination. And again, watching all your presentations today, again, it's been kind of sad because there's really no work being done on management and planning of any sort, again, except in very isolated examples. But considering the great wealth of experience about how to work in mountain areas that you've all showed to me these 2 days, and at the same time, because there's almost nothing happening, in some ways it's an advantage because there's not a whole bunch of mistakes that have to be gone back to and fixed. There's kind of an open field where there's opportunities to come in and say, okay, well, we can see that there's problems with waste here, and let's figure out why it's like that, and then let's look at this wealth of solutions that are out there and see what works best for you. So if anybody's interested, just let me know. And that's it. Thank you, and come and visit us. This is this area that we're trying to promote for acclimatization right on Lake Titicaca, which might be a nice place for some of you to get started. Any questions?
With the change in politics in Bolivia, has there been a change in what countries visitors are coming from down in Bolivia?
Well, the U.S. has never been it's low in percentages, and it has decreased definitely over the last 5 or 6 years. Most people who are coming from Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and we now have a growing influx of Brazilians, Chileans, and Argentinians who come in particular for the Uyuni Salt Flats, because the Uyuni Salt Flats have gotten massive coverage. Practically any airline magazine that you open up these days has got the Salar de Uyuni. So in terms of demographics, I think those are the shifts that I can see. Europe, Australia have remained strong. We're starting to get people from Asia coming, from China, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia in the last couple years, which is new, at least for us. And then the neighboring countries are starting to show up where they didn't before, especially Brazil. Yeah. Any other questions?
Who are people from all these countries finding out about
Well,
you?
fortunately, we're in a lot of the guidebooks. Yeah, we're in Lonely Planet, Rough Guide, Footprint, Routard in France. And then we're members of the Adventure Travel Trade Association, ATA, and that's a big help for us. And we use TripAdvisor. So that's mostly how. And then we're starting to do a lot of work with school groups, which brings in some interesting clients, and that's mostly word of mouth. Yeah.
With a long history of minerals and development in heavy industry, anything on the lithium front?
Well, apparently, this is the other, let me just show you one more picture if you don't mind. Just take me a second. I want to just show you another picture of the Salar de Uyuni, because this is where the lithium is. See if that shows up. Now I need to get to this slide. Okay. Doesn't want to go. It's this. It doesn't want to show up. Well, sorry, but the Salar de Uyuni, which some of you have heard of, is a massive salt flat. And it does have, I think, the second largest reserves of lithium underneath it. And apparently the Chinese, surprise, surprise, have signed the first contract with the Bolivian government to do some exploration. On the one hand, it's not cost effective yet. It's a lot more remote than where lithium is currently mined. And I should also say that the policy of the government is that they don't generally, and this isn't always true because there's a lot of contradictions in the policies of the government, but the current line or approach is that Bolivia doesn't want raw material to be exported from the country. And so setting up processing of lithium there, I mean, the costs would be incredible, and getting people to move there, the people that you would need to go there and run these factories, because Bolivians wouldn't be able to do it all, I think would be very difficult. You won't get many people who are willing to leave Geneva or wherever they are and go work here on lithium processing. It'd be very expensive. But it is going to happen at some point. Yeah. Any more questions? Comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much. I hope I didn't go on for too long.
Very much. Just a couple of quickies. Remember, 7 o'clock tonight, the Everest Knot in this room. And there are a few people, I'll just read this list real fast. Jeff Hill,